Let's go to one of the left or right hand side views. I'm going to turn my Soul objects off. And I want to point out that most shoes are not flat on the ground. They curve up here and also at the back sometimes like this. So we need to curve these objects to make them more realistic to our reference image. Now there's two ways that we can do that. We can manually get each section of this sole and rotate it and position it and then adjust it. Or we can curve the sole by adding a Bezier curve. So if we hit Shift A and we go to curve and then hit Bezier curve, you might not be able to see anything here because the curve often will land flat by default. So we need to rotate this curve here. The easiest way is to go to the Object Properties tab and change the rotation. So rotate on the X-axis by 90 degrees and the Z-axis by 90 degrees. Now when we go back to our side view, we should be able to see the curve, but the reference image is in front of it. So we just need to move our curve along on this X-axis. So now we can see this curve here. And if we have the curve selected and then we go into edit mode, we can see more details of what's actually going on. And this curve has 2 points, which is this point here, which has this red line that we can scale down and rotate. And we also have this point up here, which we can scale down and rotate. So I want to shape this curve so it follows the curve of the shoe here. So I want to get this point and I'm going to press G. And I'm going to start further back than the shoe. And I'm going to carry on the curve a bit further than when it stops. I'm going to position this curve in the middle of the shoe. And at this point, I'm going to hit E and extrude this curve even further and rotate this point. If you haven't used this curve tool before, it may take a while to get the positioning right so it follows the outline of the shoe. Remember that you can scale the point of the curves. Okay, so I think I've done a pretty good job here. It doesn't have to be perfect. I added this point in the center because if you pay real close attention, the sole actually changes a bit here. But if you hit Tab to go back into object mode, this is the curve I've made. Now, if we turn the sole objects back on, so if we make them visible again, we need to make these sole objects follow this curve. So to do that, we select the sole object and we add a modifier. So we go to this wrench icon and we add a modifier. And we want to add the curve modifier. And not much should change when you click that, because we haven't selected an object for this to follow the curve of. So if we click this little eyedropper tool under object, we could try and find the curve within the viewport. But if you have a lot going on inside the viewport, it's often easier to just find it in the list of items on the top right. And once we click that, what often happens is this section will have shifted further to the left or the right, probably more than you would imagine. Which is fine because we can just shift it along the curve now. So if I make the other sole objects not visible so we can see what's happening here. So if I press G to move the sole along the Y axis, you can see now that I can move this piece of the sole along this curve. So you can imagine that this would make quite interesting animations, but we're not going to go into that right now. But I'm going to push this section of the sole right to the end, to the toe there. You see, as we bend these sections, we will need to further adjust the shape. But I will leave it there for now. And then we'll introduce the middle front section and basically repeat that. So we add a modifier and we go to curve and select the eyedropper tool under object and select the curve again. And we want to press G to move this, but we want to only move it along the Y axis. And again, we want to move that further along there. You can see how nicely they will fit together as they're following the same curve. And again, repeat that same process. So add a modifier, go to the curve, and select the Bezier curve, and then move it along the Y axis. These objects are possibly going to collide as we move them along the curve, but don't worry too much as we haven't modified the shape of these yet. And repeat that again, so add the modifier, curve modifier, and make sure we select the Bezier curve. And the final back section, we're going to add the modifier, curve, use the eyedropper tool, and move that further along. So now if we take a look, what should have happened is it does look a lot more shoe-like. This bit's been squished up here, but once the sock part of the shoe is on top of that, we won't see it. And we can now edit the shapes of these different parts of the sole. But if we select it and hit Tab, you'll notice that this will go back to its original position, which makes it difficult to edit what it will look like when it's at the position on this curve. And the same will happen for each component. So what we need to do is we need to permanently apply the modifier. And we do that just by pressing the Apply button. And when we click Apply on the modifier, this will remove the modifier from this stack or list of modifiers. So we need to repeat that for each section. Now if we hit Tab to go into edit mode, it will remain in that position. And we can hide the curve now, or we can delete it. I often hide it just in case I need to refer back to it. Perhaps I would need it for the sock section of the shoe. My objects in the viewport have random colors assigned to them. This makes it really easy to differentiate between the different objects in the model. You can do this by going to the top right and clicking on the drop-down menu near the shading panel. Under color, there's an option for random. If you have applied custom materials and colors to your model, you may want to set this to material. But if you were at the beginning of your model and you were just trying to get the shapes right, I often select random, which is a bit more exciting than looking at a lot of gray objects.